When I first encountered Edwards myself, it was the Edwards of his great sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. God is angry because we are all sinners, and Edwards preached that position vehemently and with vigor and with great style, and it was one of the greatest sermons ever preached in America. It was a very different kind of Edwards that I started to learn about. He was, for example, very conscious of the beauty of the world, the beauty of people, the beauty of nature. He was a great preacher of beauty and worked it all through his sermons. He was a great preacher of light. He actually talked about light in a lot of different ways. He used light the way the Bible uses light, let there be light. But he also was very conscious of some of the philosophical theories of the time, of his time, Newton and his principles of light and gravity and so forth. And he worked those too into his sermons. And it was not only Newton that was important to him, it was people like John Locke who wrote about sensationalist psychology, and he took Enlightenment philosophy very seriously. He was a Calvinist. He believed in the omnipotence of God, but he realized that this could not just be brushed aside. If they could not be made compatible with each other, then religion was in big trouble. And a big part of what he did over the course of his career was to try to achieve that compatibility. At the end of his life, he actually died because he had gotten a vaccination for smallpox, and there were some complications. The vaccination didn't kill him, but there was an infection, and he died because of that. But it would never have occurred to him not to try these advanced measures of science to try to cure himself. He also loved to talk about harmony. The harmony of the Trinity was extremely important to him. The harmony that was supposed to exist in the congregation, the souls of the saints, harmonious. This was a goal, of course. Never quite happened, but that's a part of what the revivals were supposed to achieve. The harmony of the universe, of the way everything worked together, and he used the notion of Newtonian gravity to talk about the harmonious way the heavenly bodies moved. And the harmony of music. He introduced harmonious hymn singing to the Valley, got it from England and from the eastern part of Massachusetts Bay. Introduced part singing, thought, I'll just, another quote, the best, most beautiful, most perfect way that we have of expressing a sweet concord of mind to each other is by music. When I would form in my mind an idea of a society in the highest degree happy, I think of them as expressing their love, their joy, and their inward concord and harmony and spiritual beauty by sweetly singing to each other. Sweet. He used sweetness and sweet and sweetly all the time. So, you read enough of his work and you realize that he was quite a different person. He's just a different person. He's very sensitive. He's very poetic. He's a lovely man, in spite of the fact that he would occasionally, not very often, but occasionally preach these hellfire sermons. You had to scare people to keep them away from hell and focus them. But most of the time he did not do that, and he was a very different person. God in Edwards starts to look very different from the angry entity that I knew initially from the sermon Sinners in the Hands, and from the fact that God was willing to consign people to hell if they did not achieve grace. Because Edwards talked about him in such a different way, most of the time, God himself starts to look loving and caring and eager, let's say, to extend grace to as many people as would accept it. Most people think of revivalists as wanting to save individual souls, and that's really it. Edwards did want to save individual souls. I've talked about that. But there was a larger social purpose, or at least an additional, an auxiliary social purpose, and that was to improve human society as existed around him. And that was a part of him that I had never actually read about very much at all. And when I started to uncover it, it was pretty exciting. One of his biggest sermons, his first big multi-part sermon was in 1733, The Duty of Charity to the Poor, where he lays out a message that Christians, if they are Christians, must give to the poor. He is one of the greatest preachers, I would say, of the gospel of charity in American history. He is much more similar to people like Theodore Parker in the mid-19th century or Walter Rauschenbusch in the late 19th century, preachers of the social gospel. Edwards was not exactly a social gospeler because he was a Calvinist and he did care a lot about heaven and hell. But his message sounds basically the same when he's talking about poverty. We are brothers made in God's image, allied by nature, of one blood, with like faculties, subject to the same feelings and aversion to misery. We are made to subsist by society and union. Otherwise we perish. Help to others preserves human society and humanity itself. A selfish, private spirit of resistance to charity is suitable only for wolves and beasts of prey. Very powerful stuff. Right? That's part of the scolding that he did sometimes. But he was scolding people because they were selfish, right? Give, he said, because God commands it in the Scripture. It is in the Old Testament, the Hebrew Testament, it's in the New Christian Testament. Give because Christ himself was poor. And he talks about Christ as a poor working man a lot. That was a huge surprise, actually. I did not expect that at all. The face of the poor, he said, is the face of Christ. Not to give shows selfishness. We're all in the same human family, made in God's image. And then he says, holiness and poverty really can't exist. If you purport to be a Christian community, you should eliminate what he called pinching want, great need. You have to get rid of that. You have to give, which is, of course, one of the messages of the New Testament as well. You give to the poor, he said, even if they are ungrateful and obnoxious. Right? You give anyway. You give even if they themselves are to blame for their poverty, which sometimes happens. He says that's just their misfortune, right? You have to give anyway. You give even if they're not totally desperate. Don't be so eager to impose a means test on people. You give even if they are receiving public welfare. The poor laws of Massachusetts Bay did provide for the support for needy people. He said, no, there's always a lot more need than these laws are going to be able to deal with. You give anyway. He never opposed public charity. But he said it has to be supplemented through the church. So community was very important, and the model of Christ was important as well. And then the key to all this, in the end, seemed to me to be love. God's love to humanity is just, according to Edwards, everywhere. He made us in his image, right? It is a mark of his affection for us. And he's offering us salvation, says Edwards, when he doesn't really have to, right? He just loves us. It's an extension of himself. Therefore, humanity is able to love God and to love his creation and to love God's creatures, humans. Absolute love to God breaks the spirit of individualism, according to Edwards. It breaks the sense of selfishness and self-centeredness and self-promotion. He argued that if heaven is a world of perfect love, hell is, he redefined hell to some extent. It's a world without love. So many of the things he says are pertinent and they're touching He depicts God in a very different way. His work is saturated with love, saturated with God's love, saturated with the urgency of achieving love here on earth as in heaven. A good example of how the conventional image about Edwards is different from the image that I've come to see is when you go into First Churches in Northampton, which is on the site where his church stood. It's not the same building, but it's in the same place. You see on the wall a bas-relief, very pretty thing. It's quite a dramatic thing. It's on as you go in from the narthex. It's on the right hand wall, and it's lighted from the top, and it looks somewhat fearsome, right? You see these eyes that are staring at you, and you think, my gosh, he's an intellectual, right? And you see his eyes look like they look into your soul, and so he's about to criticize. So in some ways, the deep cuts in the way the thing is lighted reinforces this image of Edwards and of Edwards as God as being fierce and angry and judgmental, and of course he could be all of those things. But if you look closely at the bas-relief, you see this wonderful hand right at the bottom of it, sort of extended. And when I see that hand, I see that it's an act of love and affection. It's not an act of anger. And so it reinforces the notion that history has shown this light on him that hides a little bit what he was really all about.